Did any of you go to church camp when you were a kid? I did. It started when I was in junior high. I would go every winter, I would go to church camp. Now here's the thing. I was a kid who grew up in the church. I was at church all the time. From the minute I was born, I was in the church. My parents were very active in the first church that we were a part of, and they were in the choir. They cleaned the sanctuary. I remember sitting on the buffer that Mom would use to clean the fellowship hall. Dad and Mom were both youth leaders in the church. When we moved to San Diego, they stayed involved in the church. They were in the choir. They helped out with committees. They were session elders and deacons. They were so involved in the church, and therefore I was involved in the church. And so I grew up in the church. I was always there, and I remember listening to sermons and Sunday school teachers and all those things. And it was just a natural part of my life. Well, when I was in junior high and we started going to junior high camp and then senior high camp in the winters, we went to this beautiful camp that was up in the San Bernardino Mountains, and they were great experiences. I mean, we had lots of fun. They had some really good workshops that we would do, but the highlight for me was always the kind of plenary sessions, the time when we would come together and there would be music. I mean, the stage was kind of set up like it is here, and there would be lots of fun and excitement going on, and then the speaker would come out, and he would, it was almost always a he. During that time, it was kind of like not a time where they will allow women to do these kinds of things, which was probably a sign, but anyway, the guy would come out and he would kind of give his big speech of the day. I mean, his big inspirational talk. And it always started the same way. It was always something funny that was going on. He would tell these great stories and get us all laughing. And it would be this great fun time. And we'd all be looking at each other, nudging each other when he would tell these stories. And it was great. And then he would do something that always fascinated me. He'd reach behind himself and he'd pull out a Bible and he'd throw it open like this. And I remember it was always a floppy Bible, a big floppy Bible, so he could hold it in his hand like this. And he would begin to read his stories, and he would tell the stories of Scripture, and then he would start talking about Jesus, and he would say, Jesus died on the cross for you, and then he would go into these great details about how painful it would have been to be crucified, and then he would tell stories about all the suffering that Jesus went through, and he would be sitting there and he would say, Jesus did this for you because you are a sinner and you're so terrible and awful, and that's why Jesus did this for you, because he loved you even though you didn't love him. And he would do this, and he would be moving us through our shame and our guilt and our fear, because he would tell us, Jesus died on the cross for you because you're a terrible, awful person. I mean, he didn't really say it like that, but that's what I heard. And then he would talk about how because of your sin, because of all that you've done, you're going to go to hell unless you come forward and you pray this prayer with me. And that's what he always did. He would do this prayer. And it happened year after year. It didn't matter who the speaker was. They would do this prayer where you were to invite Jesus into your heart. And at the end of that prayer, towards the end of that prayer, he would say, now, if you have prayed that prayer today, then I want you to raise your hand, and hands would go up. We're not supposed to peek, but I was peeking, and all these hands would go up. And then he would say, now, if you've prayed that prayer and if your hand has gone up, I want you to come forward here. I want you to get up from your seat right now, and I want you to come forward here. So we have a counselor here that's going to pray with you, and they're going to help you become a Christian and devote your life to Jesus. And I remember year after year going through that. And I remember being so ashamed of all that I had done, and so guilty and so afraid that if I didn't do this, then God was going to look down upon me and just not like me. And so the times where I would pray that prayer, or I'd raise my hand, I think there's only one time that I actually came forward. But I did that year after year after year because I was so afraid. I was so afraid and so shameful. And I know that there needs to be that time in our life. There really does need to be that time in our life where we kind of make our faith commitment to being a follower of Jesus, where we need to claim our faith and to say, yes, we believe in God and we want our lives to be transformed, I know there's a time to do that, and I know there's a need to do that within our lives to kind of make that choice. But you know what? I had grown up in the church, and I could never remember there not being a time when I believed. And even when I went through confirmation, it felt like, yeah, that was just confirming everything that I had already thought about Jesus. And so when I went to camp, my motivation for coming forward seemed to be so different. It was because of this shame and this guilt and this fear. And you know, the thing is, I don't think that's how Jesus did things. In fact, there is a wonderful story that is in John's Gospel. Now, what's interesting, it's not in every old manuscript of John's Gospel. It's only in some of the other manuscripts, so it's not universal. That's why if you look up the story in John chapter 8, you're going to see a little parentheses beside it, because not all of those who translated or rewrote these stories so that everybody could have them, not all of them included this story in there. I think maybe it was because it was such a different story, and they were maybe afraid that if they included it, Jesus would seem too soft. And yet, you know what, as I look at the story, for me, I get to see this picture of Jesus that I didn't hear about in the same way at camp. So this is the story. As I said, it comes from John chapter 8. It says this: Early in the morning, Jesus came to the temple. All the people came with him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees, though, brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. And making her stand before all of them, they said to her, "Teacher," or said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say?" They said this to test Jesus, so that they might have something to charge to bring against him. But Jesus bent down and he wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept questioning him, Jesus straightened up and he said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And at once he bent down and he wrote on the ground again. Now when they heard this, when they heard what Jesus said, when they heard how Jesus said it, they began to go away one by one, beginning with the elders. And Jesus then was left alone with her. Jesus straightened up and he said to the woman, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin." You know, commentator after commentator talk about that story, and they look at details within that story, and I think, you know, some of those details that they pull out are interesting details or important details, but when it comes right down to it, for me, when I read this story, what I see is Jesus using a different way to motivate this woman to come to faith and to come to a place where she can trust and understand God. Those scribes and Pharisees, they tried to use shame. In fact, they used shame against her and even against Jesus, but not Jesus. For Jesus, it was all about the love and grace that would motivate her to follow. Jesus used compassion to get people to follow him, not fear and guilt and shame. He simply used compassion, and out of love, he reached to that woman. You know, when I think about the story and I think about my experience at camp, I'm grateful for a lot of the experiences I had, but I so wish that what they used was the same tool that Jesus used. I wish it was more about compassion and love and grace. And I am so grateful for those who transcribed this book of John. I'm so grateful for those who included that story in that book. Because truly, this exemplar is an example of how Jesus has invited us to follow him through grace and love and compassion.